My name is Dr. Chaunda Scott, and I'm a professor at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, in the USA. And I'm teaching in the area of organizational leadership within the School of Education and Human Services. And my research area focuses on workforce diversity, eradicating racism, and human resource development. My interest in the area of diversity, workforce diversity, social justice really started, as a child. My father was an activist and author, and he wrote several books. At the time, we were living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he wrote several books, highlighting what African American success looked like in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so, at that time, we were in the civil rights era in the U.S. And so it was very difficult for my father as African American man to, get support. So he self-published. And as you know, at that time, we didn't have the computers, scanners. So he was actually taking pictures on a camera, developing them, typing out the script underneath, and then pasting them on a piece of paper. I was an assistant in doing that. So, I really admire his effort, trying to elevate the African American community during that time. And so his books were he did 3 books on Minnesota's Black community. And 3 of his books were republished into 1 volume in 2018 by the Minnesota Historical Society. And so I was just elated to be a part of that, publication, since my dad is now deceased. And so from that time as a child and, watching on TV, when they announced that Martin Luther King had been killed, and, understanding the struggle that was happening in the country from my parents, I was always an activist at heart. So as I moved through my educational background, I pursued multicultural education and diversity education in my master's work at Harvard Graduate School of Education, and again at Columbia Teachers College in New York City for my doctorate degree. When I was doing my doctoral work in 2003, that's when I finished it. I was like one of the second people at Teachers College, Columbia University, to do a dissertation focused on diversity. So again, that speaks volumes in itself from an Ivy League school, and you're just now really putting pen to paper, if you will. And I just think now that, there's so many people in the corporate world that are, having DEI committees, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But again, do they really understand the concept, the principle? Because there wasn't a lot of teaching at the time that, people were going through their academic work. There is some now, but I'm still questioning what education do those teachers have to teach it? People really think it's relatively an easy topic to teach. Oh, I can teach diversity. But people fail to realize that, they kind of bring in their own perspectives that are not so much educational because, we all have our viewpoints or whatever. But I think we really need to study to know what it's about. People need to have more than just a seat at the table, if you will. They need a voice at the table, So just seeing me doesn't necessarily represent the diversity that we're trying to get to. It's just seeing me. That's it. But it's not really hearing how I'm contributing or what I can do. I think as far as some of the differences, in countries, I'll say like with Canada, if I go over to Canada, which is, not too far from Michigan, I can go right over the bridge there and be in Canada. When I'm over there, people are just saying, I'm Canadian. Whether you're a Black Canadian, Asian Canadian, people are just, I'm Canadian. Versus when you go into the US, I'm Asian American, I'm African American, I'm Latin American. So, it just really seems to be a focus on describing you when, people can really see you. If they have the gift of sight, they can see you and see your culture. So I think, I know W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the first Black graduates from Harvard University, was saying a major problem within the U.S. is the color line. So I think that's something that, we need to overcome. Because I know when I visit other countries, I spent quite a bit of time in my academic career in Cape Town, South Africa. And people will just say, I'm South African. Very rarely I heard, I'm a Black South African, I'm a white South. They're just saying, I'm South African. So, I think that, if we really want to be the diverse nation and world that we are, we are all people. So, I think whenever you have to put people in categories, it just kind of limits them. I recently published an article with a colleague, and we were talking about expanding traditional leadership models with, multicultural education competencies and leadership competencies. And so that was really eye-opening because I presented it at a conference, and, people were really, interested in hearing more about those theories of authors, such as Taylor Cox, Roosevelt Thomas, other leaders in the area in the US that are doing this work, of what kind of competencies that leaders need for that. So I think that's a primary area. And then I think too, now that a lot of companies have incorporated diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, they need to do more work than just kind of defining what those efforts are. But later on, after they've been doing the work for some while, they need to promote their outcomes. So what is the outcome for diversity in your organization? What is the outcome for inclusion? So I think, we're looking more for outcomes, not just definitions, instead of saying at my company, diversity means, equity means, inclusion means, fine. But what's the next step? How are you demonstrating that then? And what is the outcome of you doing that? I think that's what's really missing in that piece. The Diverse Voices initiative, it really was kind of born out of my experience at Harvard University when I was a master's student. I just really enjoyed the environment where, people would, after class, I had a classmate that was from Spain, and they'd say, oh, I'd really like to have coffee with you to get to, better understand about the US and, Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is my hometown. And so I just really thought that that was phenomenal, that, people were just getting together, having coffee, and it was just a very unique environment. So once I entered into academia, I was able to start a conference and it was basically for students, faculty, and community members to join together on one platform to speak out in support of valuing diversity on, relevant topics of the time. And so I started that in 1998. was sort of my first year of doing that. And it was just wonderful. It was just an ideal I had. Students came, they really liked it. A few students gave, a couple speeches on a theme. A couple faculty member did the same thing, and somebody from the community, whether it was a community leader or a business leader, did the same thing. So, students could see this is not just something we're talking about in the classroom, but people are actually doing this in their research and community and in the business world. Well, fast forward 22 years later, on October 29th of this year, will be the 20th annual Diverse Voices Conference. I mean, where did the time go? So I'm really excited that this year our theme is talking about anti-racism work, a necessity in the 21st century and beyond. From the business leaders that I've talked to, that have been involved with the Diverse Voices or in my consulting work, they have been more, I'd say within the last 5 years, they've been a little bit more open to new ideas. So just recently I had a consulting opportunity with a business, and they were, wanting to learn more about topics like adverse racism. They wanted to learn more about the initiative for eradicating racism. And they were sharing what they were doing at their organizations. And so, as I said earlier, I think it has promoted more opportunities for real conversation on these topics. And I think what has been good for me is that as we started this conversation today, is that there's that gap. I think that we need education to inform business in the area of diversity and vice versa. We're both trying to do the same thing, but we're not talking to each other. So I'm an advocate for, helping businesses with the educational side of understanding workforce diversity. And I'm more open to learn about what are some of the practices that they're doing. Because it's like, we're kind of doing two separate things. We're doing the same thing, but we really need to be informing each other, because our students are the ones that will be going into business, So if they already had a heads up about what students are learning or whatever, then it would be a better fit for them to come into the organization. If we're going to do meaningful work in the area, we need to, really understand what are the issues that we're facing. Like, for example, one of the more modern issues in workforce diversity is spirituality in the workplace. So like a lot of businesses, are hiring Muslims and from different cultures that, have to pray, 4 or 5 times a day. So a lot of businesses have created prayer rooms or meditation rooms or whatnot. So that's kind of like one of the new advances that is happening that's been more acceptable. And it's kind of like, nationwide over in the US, they're going to have like a meditation room at many of the airports, for people to go into, because that is a workplace for some people. So I think it's just things like that they need to have discussions about, or I think they really need to do more work in the area of disabilities. I mean, disabilities isn't just somebody who can't walk. There's some disabilities that you can't see that people have. So there really needs to be more discussions about that. So how can you be more inclusive in getting that population put into your workplace? So these are the type of critical discussions, that I'm talking about that, businesses really need to have. Diversity, it's one word that encompasses many things. And so when, people are talking about diversity, it really kind of minimizes the area because you're talking about a lot of different, Asians, African Americans, and different populations that don't really rise to the top of that term. So I think, for one, if people are going to be doing diversity work, I think they should have like a, a strategic plan and look at what they're going to do for the different populations and the different type of work that they're doing, because um, I would say that a one size fits all approach doesn't really fit every culture. Like I just talked about, the people with disabilities, they need a different approach. Spirituality, that's a different approach. It doesn't, it needs something different. So I think that, we really need to, if we're going to operate under the term, then we need to make sure that we're doing something for all of the categories that fit underneath there, and don't just take a one size fits all approach, because every issue is different. So I would say, be more specific about what you're doing. And I'm a big fan of strategic plans to organize, when and where and what I'm trying to do, which I think is a good approach.